welcome to the Friday show. Joining me today, comedian Christian Finnegan and writer, speaker, author, and grief advocate Marisa Renee Lee and I have one of the best conversations I've had in a long time. And I like to think the conversations are pretty darn good each and every day. But you are going to love my conversation with Marisa, who joins me for the first time, as well as Christian. We got into it, had a very deep and thoughtful conversation, as we often do, and I'm real happy about both of these today. If you are listening on Friday, happy Friday, TGIF. It's actually the day after the January 6th hearing, installment 8, that took place at 8 p.m., and I got together with 50 of my goodest friends at the Hangout last night. 50 listeners, subscribers, friends joining me last night to watch it together, and it was fun, except for when people didn't know what was going on and they just joined the Zoom and everything was quiet because we were watching it on another screen and then chiming in on the chat, and it was weird for some people. Shout out to Kimberly Richardson, who climbed a ladder and killed a wasp nest in her home during the hearings last night. Love you, Kim. We had a lot of fun. Last night. Shout out to Phil and Karen, who are both ill with COVID, as well as President Biden. So I guess you're in good company there. Thinking of you guys and everybody else. If you haven't signed up for a subscription, would love to have you do it now. And a very special thank you and welcome to both Talmadge Kirkland and Denise Stackley. Thank you very much for signing up for subscriptions to the podcast and the work. And if you would like to do that, it would be huge, and I would really appreciate it, and it would help me keep doing the work. And you just need to go to standupwithpete.com, patreon.com/Pete Dominic right now. And thank you again, Denise, Talmadge. Look forward to hearing from you, getting to know you. Talmadge actually showed up at the Hangout last night. Handsome guy, and got to see him for a minute. I don't know where you went. Where did you go, Talmadge? Okay, so hope I'm saying your name right. Thank you for listening today. I think you're really going to like it. I don't have anything else to say other than that. But let's get to the conversations right now. I don't want you to miss my conversation with Christian Finnegan, which is coming up after my conversation with Marisa Renee Lee, who joins me for the first time, a fascinating woman who's had a fascinating life. She's a writer, a speaker, an author, an entrepreneur, a mother, and a husband. Oh, she has a husband. She has a wife. In 2008, she lost her mother to breast cancer. In 2019, she and her husband lost a much-wanted pregnancy. And most recently, she lost a cousin to the COVID-19 pandemic. These losses transformed her life and led her to question what grief really is and what healing truly requires. But she had a huge career before that, where she was a former appointee in the Obama White House. She also served as deputy director of the private sector engagement for President Obama. She was the managing director for the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, which was born out of President Obama's call to action to address the barriers to success that boys and young men of color disproportionately face in their lives. She's also currently the CEO of a social impact consulting firm, Beacon Advisors. She's co-founder of the digital platform Supportal, founder of the Pink Agenda, a national organization dedicated to raising money for breast cancer research and awareness. She's a regular contributor to Glamour, Vogue, MSNBC, The Atlantic, a graduate of the Harvard College, and I'm really, really happy to have her on the show for the first time. Her credentials, on paper, she's obviously really impressive, but in person she was too, and I really keep saying really, and I want to just play the interview. MarisaReneeLee.com. Please go say hi to her on Twitter and let her know that you heard this conversation. And you are going to love the book as well. On Twitter, at Marisa Renee Lee. Let's do it! Welcome to Stand Up. We're so excited to have you. Shout out to Tina Winsett, who demanded I get you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. I think we're going to have a fun chat.
Yeah, I was just saying, can I talk to you a little bit about your life and career and some of the work? Because you really are an open book. You put a lot out there in articles and podcasts, and obviously in this amazing book you've written. We know you pretty well, but I guess I wanted to just lead into talking about, like, what was your childhood like? How did you become the person that you are? And if you want to include, your mom and your dad and whatever, I'm blown away by, like, your career and your life.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was actually reflecting on my childhood right before I got on this, because I'm delivering a sermon at my super progressive church this weekend in the DC area. And it starts with childhood stuff. And I've also just been thinking a lot, how much of who we are is innate versus, what we learn from our environments and experiences. Right. Yeah. And I think, like, I'm sure, you know, having kids, especially, it's a both and. I was always super ambitious and focused and competitive, even from like a very young age. You know, it wasn't anything that my parents did. They were not these like helicopter parents. You have to do these activities so you can get this award and then do this thing and go to this school and whatever. I was just always like wanting to do stuff, wanting to create stuff.
At what were your things that you were doing?
So
what are you good at?
one of my earliest memories is just telling my mom, you know, probably 5 or so years old. I told her I wanted to be an actress and a lawyer. And she said, okay, well, then you're going to have to read a lot of books. So I started my own like reading club just for me, which doesn't really make it a club, I don't think. But that was one of my first projects that I started. And then when I was 11, like so many girls from my 80s generation, I had been reading the Babysitter's Club books.
Yeah.
And my best friend and I, we decided, oh, if these girls can do it, we're going to start our own babysitting business. And so, you know, we made up flyers, we had our dads drive us around, and we had like a pretty profitable business. So I've been working on something since I was 11. When I was in high school, I decided it was ridiculous that the school board was only adults. Like, it was a bunch of old white people, frankly, mostly men who hadn't been in school in a million decades. And I'm like, why are they making decisions that almost always result in cuts in funding for our after school activities? Like, this doesn't make any sense at all. And so I lobbied until myself and another student were allowed to join the school board. So yeah, I've just always been like a pusher and interested in the world and giving back. And some of it definitely comes from my parents. They're both super generous people.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask. Separate what you think, the nurture from nature. What did your parents do to instill those qualities of, you know, the ambition and the being the focus and the competition? Although I haven't heard an example of competition. Did you crush people? Do you crush people?
Not intentionally, but yes. You know, I was always running for something. Like, I was class president, I was student body president, I was running like against other people to be a peer mediator of all things. Like, that's supposed to be peaceful, and it was turned into a competition. You know, if there was something to compete for, like, I was there.
Did you do a negative?
Very good at.
Did you run a negative ad at your opponent in the peer mediator race?
I didn't do that. Okay, here's what I do remember doing. I'll be honest. I definitely remember knowing that it was something that I wanted, because again, this like weird ambition set in very early. I was maybe in 3rd grade. And so I remember going around to other kids, like very casually campaigning, basically telling them like, this is why I think this is an important program for us to have. And this is why I think I would be really good at it. Like, no big deal, over by the monkey bars kind of thing. So what did my parents do with this crazy child? I think the most important thing that my parents did that I hope to be able to do for my child is they just gave me space to be who I was, and they encouraged who I was. So when I told my mom, you know, the actress lawyer thing, she not only encouraged the reading, but, you know, when I asked, she signed me up for theater camp. And she would make me volunteer for speaking things at church or in our community, because she's like, if you're going to be an actress and a lawyer, you also got to speak in front of people a lot. Like, they never tried to talk me out of anything, no matter how ridiculous or absurd. Yeah, it was like, they were like, okay, like, if that's what you want, then here's what you might do as a next step. Like, that was always their response to whatever came out of my mouth. Like, we believe in you, but you have to do this work too.
How did your parents deal with, and how did you deal with the idea that you can do anything you want and we'll support you, but you're also a Black girl in America in the 80s?
I know. Yeah. So it was twofold. So one thing that I found, and that I've found from a number of my Black friends, and, you know, I was born in 1983. So just to give some context, a lot of us were brought up by parents who I think more than they maybe should have, like tried to shield us from a lot of that stuff. Like it was my grandparents who were honestly more intentional about like, this is what you need to be aware of. Like, this is what the world is really like. Whereas I grew up in a predominantly white community, kind of sandwiched in between two more diverse communities. So, you know, my graduating class in high school, 450 kids, 4 of us were Black and 3 of us were actually related. So playing into every stereotype. Yes. Yes. And so I think, and it's hard because obviously I can't have these conversations with my mom, but given the writing that I've done and the discussions that I've been able to have with my dad since, they really thought that they were kind of protecting us by downplaying any race-related fears or concerns that they had and essentially like immersing us in whiteness. And that is one of the things that I struggle with a little bit from my childhood, because that meant that when I encountered like deeply painful personal racism in the form of, you know, boyfriend at senior year of high school whose family was white and like I was not welcome in their house, you know, that kind of stuff. Like it was such a shock to the system. Like I literally, I knew that racism was a thing, you know, I knew that there were these people who didn't like people because they were Black. And I guess that extended to me, but like I hadn't really wrapped my mind around it until that happened.
I'm sure
then it was like, oh shit.
I wonder, I'd love to hear you write about that and research that, other people in similar situations. But what I'm hearing is it's like, oh, I have to develop a resilience at a different time of my life in a different way than a lot of other Black folks would. Yeah. Especially given that time. I mean, it all matters, but, and your parents think they're doing the
best thing, right?
Do you have resentment about that choice to bring you up there? Or do you wish, do you wish you grew up in like a Black community or a more diverse community or anything else?
I wish I grew up around more Black people and with more racial awareness overall.
Right.
Because even like, I really was surrounded for the most part by like wonderful, supportive, kind white people who were my mentors and my teachers and my cheerleaders, you know, like couldn't have been better toward me. But I think that, especially over these last 2 years, like the way that, not all, but the way that many white people have been trying to be more aware of the ways in which racism shows up and causes harm to people of color, like over and over again, all day long, most days of the week. I think that's really important. And I'm glad that my son will hopefully have access to some of that. I wish I had both that white awareness and just more Black people around. Like the Black people I had around were my family for the most part, you know, like, and that was pretty much it.
That's all. I want to talk more about all of that, but I want to get to your book, and I want to just ask you one more question along the lines of race. You have this piece at Glamour magazine from, what is it, 2020, August 2020. It's I Have the Right Credentials. Being Black in America is still exhausting. And before even reading it, I had been prepared to interview you, and you're kind of a great example of someone who is like so accomplished, and yet statistics say if you're Black in America, you don't have as much, quote, success, and however we decide to measure that, than say white people who didn't have the same type of education. Yeah. And you have done so much, and I want to talk about a lot of your work in so many different sectors of society, from politics and nonprofit to the private sector to literature now and activism and speaking. And you're the most qualified person in the world, probably, at many things. So what are you talking about when you say I'm exhausted? Because I think everybody has a different definition of that. But what's your experience? What do you mean?
So it's a couple things. You know, first of all, I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, when these things happen, because I wrote that piece, you know, that was the George Floyd summer. It was right after Jacob Blake was shot in Wisconsin. And I have a white husband who is from Wisconsin. And we have had, almost every time we go back, there is some race incident. And so for me, even though I have, no personal connection to Jacob Blake, just being Black and then also having ties.
It should be mentioned I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm thinking of listeners. Like, it took me a second to remember who Jacob Blake was, but people probably more likely to know the name Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah, gosh.
And then Jacob Blake, which I think...
which is horrifying. Which is horrifying
because, of course, he was a victim shot by police, Jacob Blake, and then as a result, there were protests and Kyle Rittenhouse showed up with his gun.
Yeah.
But anyway,
that's a great point.
I hated to interrupt you, but I thought it was worth it. Just be like, it's kind of emblematic of society. So there you were. And at that time, you've painted the picture of what was happening in America, pandemic.
And it is exhausting and enraging because I know that even with, my Harvard degree, my best-selling book, my time on Wall Street, in the White House, whatever, like at the end of the day, none of those things offer me full protection, nor do they guarantee that I will be treated the same as someone who is white. Like, I am not, like, no matter what I do, I feel like I am pretty much as safe as a Black woman could be in America because I have all of those boxes that I've checked and, a nice fancy resume. But at the end of the day, if I get stopped by a cop under the wrong set of circumstances, maybe not looking fully made up with hair done, et cetera, like I have today, who knows what the outcome could be? And I'm going to give like a very specific example of how like race recently played into my life. So last summer, my car, my driver's side window on my car stopped going down. Like, it just wouldn't roll down. It's like a brand new car, just some weird thing happened to it. So I took it into the dealership and they were like, well, we can't do the inspection. We can't completely fix it because we need these different parts, whatever, but it's drivable. So like you can leave with your car and bring it back, for an appointment in a week or whatever it was going to be. And I was like, no, I can't. Like this is America. And I am not going to drive around in what's technically a southern state that I live in with a driver's side window that I can't roll down because heaven forbid I get pulled over by the wrong person and they think that I'm, I don't know, fucking around or doing something I shouldn't be doing, or I appear dangerous because I'm Black or whatever. And then I put my life at risk.
Yeah, it's not a comfortable way to start an interaction with a police officer with, that window's broken. I'm sorry. The window is broken.
Like shouting at them, like, no, like and it's like things like that. And it took me, half a day and multiple phone calls and getting on the phone with the manager and being like Black Karen about it. Like, this person doesn't understand, but these are the circumstances and this is the world that we live in. So you need to give me a loaner car. Of course, it ended up taking them almost 6 weeks to fix my damn car. So I'm glad that I did what I did. But I think we are constantly having to think about how to both contort ourselves to the standards that have been set by whiteness and how to make sure in every interaction, in every new thing that we do, that we're keeping ourselves safe. And like, white people don't have to do that.
Yeah, no, I have a lot going on in my life right now, and I have some specific struggles and everything, and it's hard. But I am so glad I don't have any nonsense like that. I have to be on the defensive for those kinds of scenarios in life. Yeah, it's terrible. But people could also say, I think the best example statistically is, your anecdote is fascinating because I never would have thought about that with a window, of course. But I think the best statistic that I've heard about and interviewed a bunch of people who've written about this, including my friend Anousheh Hussain, is healthcare. So you're this Black woman with this snazzy resume. You're friends with Barack Obama, it would seem. You may be the closest I've ever gotten to him. If I'm not gonna lie to you. But anyway, text him while we're talking. So the point being, if you show up at a hospital, you're getting a different kind of care as a Black woman. There's so much, so many statistics on this, and there's a billion anecdotes. It doesn't matter who you are, where you went to school, or who you know. Yeah. You're in the ER, or you're giving birth, or whatever it is. And I feel like that's when I hear a lot specifically from Black women, the healthcare issue.
Oh my God. Which, like, for me, like, I can remember, this is going back a few years, I made an appointment with a new OBGYN because my husband and I were dealing with infertility stuff and, getting ready to go through IVF. And I wanted to find somebody who would really be there and could help shepherd a baby into the world, theoretically. And I I show up to the appointment dressed a certain way, makeup done, hair done, nails done, the whole thing. And I am literally prepared, sitting in one of those paper gowns on the examination table, ready to go through all of my bullet points about what I want, why I want it, why I'm concerned, all the Black maternal health stuff. And a Black woman walked in as my doctor. And I cannot describe to you the exhale. I almost cried. It was the first time, and this would have been when I was 36, 37. It was the first time in my life I had ever had a Black doctor. And the fact that it was in this context where I was already feeling vulnerable and uncomfortable, it's oh my God, I'm going to be okay.
Why were I'm
going to be okay.
I'm somewhat lost. Why were you surprised that the doctor was a Black? Why didn't you know? You told me, where were you? That it was.
So I was my first appointment with this person. I found someone new, and I didn't see their picture online.
Okay,
So I knew the woman's name and whatever, and I was just sitting on the table expecting a white woman. Frankly,
well, there's another statistic about that I've heard this so many times about names, by the way, with acceptance to college. If you have, her name probably wasn't quote Black sounding or something.
Exactly. It was Dr. Moore, which I was oh, this is.
It was a Seamus McCluskey. Influx of Black women.
That's real. And I think about the health piece, it's, it's a bit comical, that story is in particular, but I also think about it a lot around my mom. She was.
So let's talk about your mom and talk about, we can get to that. But let me just take a step back in terms of, I think it'd be fascinating to ask you, you read the book and listen to interviews with you, and you talk a lot about your mom. And I don't know, maybe I'm being selfish, but I think this is a good question for people about their relationships with their moms, and their relationships with their kids, and having, adolescent daughters. I was wondering if you would tell me about, I know maybe you haven't thought about this, maybe you've written about it, forgive me if I didn't see it yet, the way your relationship changed with your mom over your lifetime. How were you guys when you were a little girl? What was it like? And then an adolescent, and then, in your 20s when she saw everything that you became?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I haven't written much about it, actually. Childhood, we were always really close. My parents were married for a few years before they had kids. I was the first kid. And I am told, even with all of the competitiveness and crazy ideas, I was a good kid and I just wanted to hang out with my mom. We were just naturally very close. And then
what did you do when you would hang out? What did you?
Oh, some of my favorite memories were spent swimming, which I know Black people aren't supposed to swim, but my mom.
I don't think people say they're not supposed to.
I'm just messing around.
No, I've seen every Black comedian. Go ahead.
Grew up with a pool in her backyard. Oh. And so she was very big on both me and my sister and my cousins, learning how to swim at a young age. So we were babies in lessons at the Y. And then, I have all of these memories of my mom sitting on the edge of the pool and me as a little kid sitting on her feet and holding her hands, and she would kick her legs and then let go. And I would just get to go flying. And I thought that was the best thing ever. I loved getting, this is so dorky, but I loved getting to run errands with my mom, particularly going to the grocery store. I'm obsessed with food. I have been since I was a small child. And if you're the kid that goes for the grocery trip, you get all of your preferences,
sure.
All of your cookies and chips and whatever. Yeah. We also spent a lot of time at church. My mom was a Sunday school teacher, and she made me help her whether I wanted to or not. And she was a really good baker. So lots of time spent in the kitchen with her when I was a little kid. And then, she got sick when I was 13.
Right.
And that just changed everything. I think in retrospect, I probably would have spent more time as a typical rebellious, little bit of a pain in the ass teenager, but I just didn't have time. My mom was really sick. I was helping my dad like care for her. And then I have a younger sister who suffers with bipolar disorder. And at the time, you know, we didn't know exactly what was wrong with my sister, but she was also having challenges. So like, you know, it was me being a kid and also trying to be like a bit of a parent and a caretaker for both my mom and her.
That's got to be, you hear about that a lot. It's not atypical for a child to have, you know, a parent, somebody you have to take care of for any number of reasons. And what does that do to your adolescence? What does that make, you know, you become? And clearly it had an effect on you in many ways when you talk about it. But, you know, you were leading into the healthcare thing and your mom was diagnosed, but not for a long time. I mean, this is, I think, maybe the point you were going to make of just, she couldn't even, she knew something was wrong. She knew it. You know it. Sometimes people just know it. And, you know, you can take us through that.
She knew it and she kept going back, and there were specialists and there were chiropractors and acupuncture people, and there was physical therapy and all different meds and in and out of the hospital and all of these things. And I mean, it went on for years. Like I was 13 when she first got sick. I don't think she was definitively diagnosed with multiple sclerosis until I was either 16 or 17, I think 17, which seems insane to me, but I'm pretty sure I was 17. And they were only able, they said they were only able to figure it out because at that point it had done permanent damage to her brain. And on one of her millions of tests, they saw that brain damage. And the fact that it had to get to that point, you know, you have to ask, like, does it have something to do with the fact that she was a relatively uneducated Black woman? And then with her breast cancer, she was diagnosed my senior spring in college. So, you know, a few years later, and she spent the previous 6 months in and out of the hospital, again, in and out of doctor's offices, specialists, everything, saying that, you know, she was having all this pain. And they basically told her it was in her head. My grandmother had died that year and they thought that she was just depressed. And it took an orthopedic surgeon who just happened to be a family friend and saw her for like a full human being. And he found cancer in her bones. And that was how we ultimately realized she had stage 4 breast cancer. So,
by the way, another example of power dynamics and opportunity and networks. And now you know this because you're Marisa Renee Lee. I mean, you have a massive, massive network from all of the work that you've done. If you have a need, I'm pretty sure you can text someone directly. And if you don't,
I'll find someone.
You'll text someone who will then text someone. You'll be like, hey, Barack, it's me. Is it not how you, Michelle?
I need him selling my book.
So, well, he should. It's so valuable for so many reasons I want to talk about. But the point is, your mom, you found this out because someone was able to connect with a doctor. Yeah. And networks are also a part of power. And, you know, I mean, I've tried so hard to build an extensive network throughout my life and career because I think it's so important. But I have a lot more opportunity to do that as well because there's clubs. They're everywhere. They're for people like me. And I love it. And we help each other out. And, you know, I mean, there's just more opportunity for that. And it just makes it so harder, which is a statistic that's hard to measure, people's limited resources in terms of
social capital.
Yeah. Social capital. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
So your book, I mean, I want to just go back just to the fact that you've done so many things in your life and career. And if someone didn't know, and I wasn't familiar with your work or career, I got referred to you by listeners, by Jason Johnson, said, you should interview this woman. She's written this book. So I read the book. I'm reading all about, you know, listening to other interviews, but you are not, this is an interesting new part of your career, but you've had like eight careers before you wrote a book about grief, which is amazing and well-researched. But who are you before that? So we can come back to how you came to writing this.
Yeah. So that's a great question. It's funny. Yes, you're right. At almost 40, I feel like I am starting this whole new career chapter.
Identity.
And it's a little crazy and overwhelming at times, but also super fun. Before writing Grief is Love, I have been in politics and public service and nonprofit work for most of my career. And before that, I was a banker. So, I graduated college, took a year off to help my parents figure out my mom's health situation, and then went and worked on Wall Street at the height of the financial crisis. I felt like after spending 4 years at Harvard, I felt like I needed to better understand how money moves and how rich people think if I was going to have a positive impact on like changing the world. Like, I didn't think that I could just go into nonprofits and get it done. I was like, I need to understand the people who actually have the power. And so that's what I did. I went and I worked at a bank for about 4 years, and it was amazing, like wonderful learning experience. And again, expanding the network and connections and all of those things. And then during my time there, my mom died, which I knew was going to happen. And for me, it was
2007,
2008. Close,
when, yeah.
Close. But
okay.
yeah, so she passed away in 2008, and there's obviously the grief part of it. I struggled. It was really hard and miserable and depressing, and I wasn't expecting any of it, which made it extra hard. But once I got through the first 6 months and kind of decided this is terrible and miserable and painful, but like, it's not my fault. There's nothing wrong with me. Like, apparently this is just the way it's supposed to feel, as fucked up as that is. I also became deeply entitled because I felt like, I had just turned 25 when my mom died, and she had just turned 49. And so I was suddenly in this place of like, what if the same thing or something similar happens to me? She got sick at 37, diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer at 45, dead by 49. I'm like, well, shit, like, I got to get going. And so I harassed everyone I knew and some people who I didn't really know until I got a job in the Obama administration. Because I was like, the worst thing in the world has happened to me. Like, the world took my most important person. Like, I felt like I was owed something, which, like, true or not, that was how I felt at the time. And I rolled with it. And I ended up here in DC in 2010. And I worked in the Obama administration for 4 years in a variety of roles, mostly around economic development, like leveraging that banker experience to do good in mostly urban and minority communities. And then when I left, I helped start a nonprofit that's now a part of the Obama Foundation. So since then, I've been writing about grief and trying to help other organizations do big things in the world. So yeah, it's been a ride.
What are you most proud of?
The thing that I'm actually most proud of is that I was able to ensure that my mom died on her terms. Like, that is absolutely the thing I'm most proud of.
I was thinking of your career accomplishments when I asked the question, and you took it to the most personal possible place, I guess. And that's, I think, how we should probably think about answering such questions.
Yeah. Like, that's on the career side, though. Honestly, this book, like, it was really, really, really hard to get out. It required a lot of like inner work myself in order to create something that was actually useful for other people.
Well, let's talk about it, because you said we had some extra time, and that's why I'm so happy that we get to talk about, so much about your life. It's just, I'm really impressed and learning a lot, and so honored that I'm getting to talk to you. And I'm also knowing, as a host of over 15 years, people are going to love this. So
good.
People are going to love you. Good. So the book is Grief is Love, Living with Loss. And you're a person who we've come to know is, I was going to say go-getter. God, that's so cringe. But you're a very ambitious, focused person. When your mom got sick, you went and researched everything you could about the illness to be as informed as you possibly could, to do whatever you could. You're getting into Harvard, I'm sure wasn't that easy. You're a blue chip, a type A, all the cliches. And so when you decided to write this book, I'm guessing you went out there and looked what was available for people in the kind of market that you wanted to be in, that you wanted your book and your work to live in. Yes?
So I actually didn't.
Oh, on purpose, I bet.
Didn't end up having time to do that. It all happened very quickly. I wrote a piece for Glamour that came out Mother's Day weekend 2020, where I was basically like, listen, like my mom died 12 years ago. I will never get over it. I don't care what anybody thinks. This is how I'm choosing to live with loss, like period. And it went kind of viral. And then a bunch of agents started reaching out. And so like, I had always had in my mind to write a book, but I didn't have a plan for it. You know, I was still recovering from our pregnancy loss and like trying to just keep my head sort of above water in the middle of a pandemic. And I clicked with this one agent and we agreed that by the end of 2020, I would finish a book proposal with him that he would then sell. And then one of the things that happened summer of 2020 was the viral hashtag, what publishing paid me, where all of these Black women, all of these people, I should say, were standing up sharing what they got paid to write their books. And of course, it turned out, you know, publishing, just like every other industry, super white. And all of these Black women that wrote amazing books, you know, like Roxane Gay, Jessamine Ward, et cetera, got paid shit to do it. And so the agent, who was an older white guy, he called me and he was like, listen, like you have a lot on your plate right now. I get it. But if you want to get the highest possible advance as a Black woman, first time writer, like this is your moment. Do you think instead of spending 6 months on a book proposal, we can do it together in 6 weeks?
Oh, wow.
And I mean, at this point, I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that I said, sure, why not? I've been thinking about a book for years. Okay. And so we put the proposal together in 6 weeks and we sold it in August of 2020. And that's the book that came out in April. And it was wild.
I think that's,
and then,
well,
sorry, were you say something?
I was just going to say that I think that I've seen this happen a few times where someone writes an article, a piece that strikes so to the heart of how people feel, and they've never heard someone voice it the way that you did here with this piece for Glamour. It makes sense that there could be a book with a bunch of different, you know, pieces, essays, and thoughts as yours is laid out. I mean, it's great because I think the problem is, and the reason I asked the question is, what did you see that was out there? And, you know, I know that you help us understand this, is the way that we deal with grief is all fucked up and all wrong. And we being, you know, it could be America, it could be different demographics. You certainly talk about from being the point of view of a Black woman and Black folks and how grief is different, which I think is also really important for all of us to know, much less for Black folks to identify with. So what makes your book, you know, what is it about? Tell folks why they want to read this, including people like me who haven't suffered with this kind of grief yet. My parents are doing pretty good. I'm lucky.
Good. First of all, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, they're awesome. They're listening.
Fantastic.
Yes.
I decided in August of 2008, because I felt like the way that grief had been sold to me was so wrong. I knew back then that I wanted to write a book about grief that wouldn't just be sad and depressing, that would describe grief as I felt it needed to be described, and that would be a New York Times bestseller, because once an overachiever, always an overachiever. And this was 6 months after my mom died. And when the opportunity came up, you know, I continued to feel those same things that I wrote in my journal all of those years ago. And so I committed with this book to finding a way to explain grief and its lifelong impact, both for grievers and for people who are interested in supporting grievers. Because I felt like I didn't have that. And I felt like because I didn't have that, I spent a lot of time shaming myself and judging myself for having all of these feelings about something that, you know, technically is very ordinary. Like all of our parents are going to die. Like that's life, right? And now I know that it's all normal. It's all fine. And I tried with this book to tell parts of my story, hopefully in such a way that people can relate to them and like see themselves and their friends and family and like my different characters. But my husband, one day when I was writing the book, he said, bless his heart, why should somebody buy your book? What makes you a grief expert? And I didn't punch him. I said, you know what? I actually feel uncomfortable every time someone describes me as a grief expert, because let's be honest, like if you were to drop dead tomorrow, everything I've learned, it's going out the window. Like somebody's going to have to scrape me off the floor, right? And so I decided to actually leverage the real experts, the folks who are in academia doing research about grief and loss and healing and trauma and race and all of it. And so that research sits underneath all of the stories and lessons in the book. So it's not just about Marisa.
Right. But it's not also an academic,
exactly.
And, just the research from the researcher's point of view, which is what makes the book great, and which is why I think everybody that's reading it and hearing about it is loving it. I mean, it's funny to listen to other interviews with people that I'm about to interview and hear how the host gets so excited. And I've heard a lot of that with you. But you write about, and I think this is such an important idea, permission to blank is what I think is an important idea, because we, a certain generation and gender, for men, permission to cry, permission to show emotions, permission to talk about anything but fucking sports. And you write about the permission to grieve. And what is the opposite of that? What do some people, or what do we normally do? What did you do?
I mean, I stuffed it down and tried to hide it. I was back at work 2 weeks after my mom died, in my like pinstripe banker suits, entertaining clients, doing what I thought I was supposed to be doing. And, every morning I could manage to get myself like showered, dressed, out of bed, on the subway. When I would go to ascend, actually, the stairs to like leave the subway and actually walk to my office, I would start having a debilitating panic attack. And this was every morning for months. Like I would just barely like get through the door. I could usually hide it on the elevator. I would take the elevator down to the basement of the bank where I worked, and I would have a complete meltdown and then I would get to a point where I could sort of collect myself. And one of my girlfriends who I worked with, she would bring me a latte and a Xanax and sit with me while I touched up my makeup, and then I would go to work. And that was like, I thought that was normal. And I needed to give myself some space to grieve and not hide how badly I was feeling. And I just didn't feel comfortable. So I recommend people like being okay with whatever comes up, whether it's sadness or anxiety or anger or whatever, like just be okay with it and acknowledge it, because every therapist I've ever seen and all of the research points to, our feelings only overwhelm us when we try to ignore them. When we acknowledge them, that's when they have less power over us. So it may feel scary, but like, that's the only way to go.
Do you have any kind of practice that you do daily?
Oh, I have so many daily practices. I'm a big fitness person. I am like a exercise, meditate, write almost every day. Even if it's just
in that like order at a certain period of time? Or?
Usually not in that order. I try to get them all done before midday. But if I'm really on it, I get them all done like first thing in the morning. And I usually start with writing. Like I have so many random thoughts, ideas, feelings, whatever. And just like getting it out of my head has been super helpful. I've also started a check-in practice at night. Because I find, when you have, so we have a 10-month-old, and when you have a baby, like you're constantly aware of their feelings because they are just like out there with them all the time. I feel like as we get older, we stop being as aware of what we're feeling and like what it might connect to or what it might mean. Yeah. And often by the time you like really acknowledge it, it's like, oh shit, I need to like go cry in the shower. Like I've been sad all week, it turns out, and I didn't even realize it. And so now when I get into bed each night, it's like, okay, what are you feeling? Like name it, get it out of the way. What are you worried about? And what are you grateful for?
Ooh.
And these are just things I do in my head for like, 3 minutes or whatever. If I did them out loud, I feel like my husband would be like, "You're crazy."
No, he should copy you. I'm
really
writing it
helpful.
down.
He should. I don't even know if he knows that I've been doing that, because that's been just the
really?
last.
You got to go tell him. Because I feel like I know, and I'm going to use it. So I don't know what. No, I think I love all of that. It's so helpful to hear, and it matters so much because, as you write, like in this case, grief never goes away, and anything that you're trying to deal with, or cope with, or adapt to, or even change, you need to work on it. I feel every day. That's what I'm learning in my own life. That's the only thing I'll say about me is like it's got to be a thing every day. You got to have a thing that you do to address it. Or else shit's not going to really change, not permanently.
No,
and
even if it's a small thing, like those baby steps, they make a difference.
Well, you have a 10-month-old. I'm going to let you go, but I want to talk so much more about the book when I'm done with it, because it's so important. And so it's not only obviously for people who have suffered loss. I think it's helping me prepare to suffer loss, because I don't have that kind of resilience in my life. I've had a pretty good run. Like, I really feel so fortunate. Talk about gratefulness. And so I know, life is inevitable. And so I think it's helpful just to prepare so you don't make some of the mistakes that you say you made if you had it to do over again. But that's what the gift is from you to us, I guess, for me.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I am happy to chat more. And I think the book can help people who've dealt with other forms of loss too, whether it's divorce or loss of a job, or even just this, state of grief that we've been in for a while as a country. Like I hope that people will feel that it's written in such a way that it can help with multiple things.
Yeah, I mean, it can help with your mental health, and we all need that. And that's one of the things we're having permission to be able to admit now. So thank you so much, Marisa. I really appreciate it.
This was fun.
Well, there you go. What did I tell you? I told you that wouldn't disappoint. Marisa Renee Lee. Go get the book. Grief is Love. And also follow her on Twitter and go check her website and say hello and tell her that you heard her on the show. That always means so much. If you don't have Twitter, go create a Twitter account just to thank stand-up guests. Very easy, and it really goes a long way. At Marisa Renee Lee, if you are suffering from any kind of grief or loss, or even if you aren't, you should get this book. I highly, highly recommend it. All right, now it's time to get to my second guest of today's show. I'm usually joined by him, also often usually with comedian Ophira Eisenberg, but Christian was available today. Ophira was not. She was on a plane, so I had an awesome conversation with Christian. We were talking for like 15 minutes before I hit record about personal stuff, and so I started asking him this question off the record, and I said, wait, let me just hit record and we'll jump right into it. Go watch Christian's comedy this weekend. Buy his special. Follow him on Twitter and subscribe to his newsletter, which has really affected me, because I've never really understood that much about music. As I've told you so often, it's my cultural blind spot. I don't discover new music enough. It's not in my life enough. Well, this newsletter really has specifically affected my life in a positive way. It's called New Music for Olds. It's Christian's Substack. So just go New Music for Olds Substack. Throw that in your search bar. Go subscribe right now, because this guy is really worth it. Here we go. Yeah, it's Finnegan Fridays. There he is. I've got him. I was just asking you. Hi, Christian. Sorry.
Hello, Peter.
I want to make sure everybody knows that you're there.
I am indeed here.
We're in the middle of a conversation, a personal conversation. I asked you a kind of a general question. I said, you know what? Let me just get your answer on the record. And so starting with a kind of a deep question about personal behavior, and is there a way to look at a person and measure how you feel about them, or even maybe aspire to wanting to be them, by the way that they react to being treated poorly? So if someone does something to you in public, cuts you off in traffic, budges you in line at the drugstore, or if it's someone that you really care about, your spouse, your child, your parent, and they do something, how do you measure someone by their reaction to being treated a certain way? Because I know how I'd like to be, and I'm not that way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's going to be a very person to person. Everyone's different. Everybody's bringing their own bag of emotional garbage to the table. And, oftentimes when somebody cuts you off in traffic and you freak out, you're freaking out because you didn't get picked for kickball in fourth grade. Do you know what I mean? And this is just how it's manifesting itself 30 years later or whatever. I do think that, and not to get all macro about this, but, it dovetails with something that I've often thought when, you hear a lot of people, you probably wouldn't hear this and think this is going to be about racism, but it is. A lot of times you'll see people who are accused of being, racist or misogynist or, transphobic or whatever. And they'll say that can't be true because I'm friendly with so-and-so. And I have, the sort of cliche, I have black friends, but the sort of, no, that's not true because I have no problem hanging out with my coworkers who are gay or Latino or whatever. But to me, the real testing ground is where does your mind go when you're in conflict with those people? You know what I mean? It's easy when everybody's getting along. It's what happens when you're at loggerheads, and that to me, why situations like the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp situation are so instructive, to just see how quickly you get vicious with someone, people end up showing their ass a lot in situations like that. There was a thing floating around Twitter yesterday. This, I guess he's a baseball writer for the Denver Post, I think, who had 2 days apart had sent these two tweets. And one was talking about some white young baseball player who flipped his bat way high up in the air. And he, was kind of talking about how great this kid was. He has that real fuck you attitude that, that the fans love or whatever. And then 2 days later was insulting some black Dominican baseball player for pounding his chest, quote unquote, like an ape, and this is, show some class, act like you've been there before, that whole thing. And it's like, that to me is just so instructive about like how you can look at similar. I haven't seen the clips, but relatively similar behavior and interpret them completely different because once you're in conflict, like once somebody does something you don't like, how quickly your brain ramps to a certain place. And, obviously that's talking about, racism, misogyny and things like that. But I think it is true on a person to person level as well.
How is it true on a person-to-person level? Because I totally follow what you're saying. I follow what you're saying, even if it was in terms of gender. If a man did it, you'd accept it. If a woman did it, you wouldn't, or vice versa. You could say the same thing about if they were Asian or whatever other ethnicities. We could talk. You mentioned, the gender identity or sexual orientation. But when it's someone that that's in your life, how does that change?
Well, I mean, even the people in your life, some of those dynamics will play out, especially when you're talking about, spouses and opposite people of the opposite sex who are close to you, either family members or partners or whatever. So some of those dynamics might play out in that situation, that if your brother did something, you might react one way. If your sister did the same thing, you might react a different way. So I do think those dynamics still play out, and we have a lot of we have programs running in the back of our mind that we are unaware of that are affecting the way we react to certain situations. Oh. I'm not totally answering your question, but I do think that certain people, when they are treated badly, will react in ways that are more helpful, and some people react in ways that are less helpful. And a lot of that has to do with just, again, what happened in your childhood or how people have treated you
today,
or even just recently. Like, I've noticed in myself, my ability to let things roll off my back is maybe not what it used to be, in terms of when I feel insulted, specifically in situations with my wife and whatnot, because of shit I'm going through. And to a certain degree, I can understand from her perspective why that seems out of nowhere. Because if I walk by you and I flick you in the ear every day and you're just like, ha ha ha, whatever, ha ha ha, and then one day you turn around and punch me, my whole thing is like, dude, this has been our relationship for the past however many, years or months or weeks or whatever. And so it's unfair for you to sort of react in this crazy way now. When you haven't
I needed the health insurance, and now you don't have a job, so
Yeah. Oh.
No, I mean, it could be anything. It could be, yes, that's a really perfect.
I don't know whether that's a cogent or an insightful thing or not, but I guess what I'm saying is people are fucked up. That's what I'm trying to get to, Pete. That is my grand diagnosis of the human race, is that everyone's brain is a cesspool of motivations they haven't fully accepted or are unaware of, and we're all just sort of fighting against an invisible enemy, and we're using the people who are actually in our lives as the sort of battleground to fight against that make-believe person.
Yeah, I think it's really well said, and I have a lot of follow-ups and different things I want to just add to it. But one thing is, life is filled with motivations that we don't know. I think one of mine that's been a problem is blame. Like, I'm very motivated to blame you. That's a motivation of mine because I don't want to take as much responsibility. I'm not saying I don't. I often do, and I'm often, I probably react the right way, but a lot of times I don't. I think maybe that's embarrassment or shame or something like that. But I think I'm motivated to blame others too often for my own behavior and reactions to stuff. Is that a motivation that you mean?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I would imagine that's not an uncommon thing either. I don't think that's a Pete Dominic exclusive.
Do you do you assign credibility to people and then react appropriately? Meaning, this person you think is a really smart person, this other person you think is smart, but I mean they're not like this guy. And so when the person who you don't maybe hold as high esteem intelligence wise makes a really good point, maybe even better than the expert, you disregard it because of who they are. And the same could be said for comedy. You laugh harder at the person if you think they're funny. You generally think.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's why, I remember I don't know if it was in the Seinfeld documentary or just an interview where he was talking about, once you get up on stage, they don't care if you're famous. You got to be funny. It's like, well, That's not really true. That's not really true. I mean, there are people, like when Jerry Seinfeld shows up at Gotham Comedy Club or Stand Up New York or one of the clubs in town and gets on set, there is a credit line that he is given immediately by the audience, who are just so excited that they're there to see this person who is globally acknowledged to be hilarious, that people will afford you a more leeway than someone who is, that they don't have those feelings towards. What was the question?
Assigning credibility to people and therefore reacting based on that credibility.
I mean, I do think that's true, and that's oftentimes why it can feel so disappointing when people to whom we have assigned credibility or likability or insight, when they step in it can feel so disappointing. I mean, I not to beat up on them, but like the Louis situation, somebody who I have admired for my entire comedy career, and to see him handle a situation in a way that I thought was really kind of lame, that probably compounded my disappointment, because it kind of in reverse of what we were just saying, that maybe if it was somebody who I didn't have strong feelings towards, maybe I would have let it roll off me a little quicker. But because it was somebody who I held in such esteem, it made a bigger impact on me.
You mentioned Louis, and I saw in your time. I love talking to you about this kind of stuff, but I saw in your Twitter timeline, which I always love to look at and catch up on. You're one of those people on Twitter that I'll like every other day or so go be like, I wonder what. Because I wish it would just feed them to me, but for whatever reason, it sometimes does and doesn't. And you always share good stuff too. You had shared the New York Times Jason Zinnemann writing about Janeane Garofalo, comedian and actress, I guess, Janeane Garofalo. Most people of a certain age are probably familiar with her. And it's an article about how she never sold out. And I just read it before I talked to you, and it was really interesting. And I love talking to you about art and culture, and I'm sure you have strong opinions on this. But what is it? One point that he makes is there was a utility that selling out did or didn't serve in terms of the credibility of an artist. And there's a difference between music and comedy. But why did that article speak to you? Where are we at in the industry and in arts and culture with the even concept of selling at? Is it even a thing?
Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, with Janine specifically, I know her a little bit now. Just, we don't hang out outside of comedy, but when we are on the same shows, which is, maybe once a month or something like that, we have nice conversations, and she's always been very supportive, and she has a really strong set of ethics, both as a human being and as a comedian. Like, this sounds dumb, but she will, if she has a joke premise that she thinks is slightly close to something that you have, she will let bring it up to you. She'll be like, hey, is this too much like your joke? Or, did I steal this? Or is this too close to what you're doing? And, she doesn't have to do that. She's a legend. She really is. And to the extent that she is no longer considered, this gigantic megastar, a lot of that is completely and utterly self-chosen. She would not have had to work hard to have had a much more lucrative life than, do you know what I mean? Like things were set up for her to basically coast on her laurels. After, the 90s, she could have spent the entire 21st century being on sitcoms as sort of the smart alecky sidekick, and kind of just chasing the audience the way a lot of people do. And she has sort of, I used to kind of refer to Janine as Christ-like, which sounds bizarre, but she sacrificed so much after the Iraq War by being outspoken and by sticking to her guns. And, people now talk about like, oh, I received death threats on Twitter, because some person be like, oh, kill yourself on Twitter. It's like, I received death threats. Like, no, somebody was, sitting in their apartment and they sent out a dumb tweet. This is a woman who like literally had people showing up to her shows, to either quote unquote protest or to enact violence upon her. And she never backed down from that, but always continued to try to write new material and be funny. Like it wasn't like she pivoted to just being a purely political person. She continued to do stand up on her own terms. And I really admire, because she will go up with her notebook still and kind of just work through ideas on stage. And sometimes club audiences just aren't buying it. It's always so interesting to see the way her brain works, but it's not always kind of like polished. Here's my, James Corden set. Here's my sort of 5 minutes of tight punchlines. A lot of it is, and she'll go off on a 10-minute tangent about Ann Taylor or something. Like just some random thing that a 19-year-old might have no ability to relate to. But I really admire her for just being utterly consistent, and to the extent that the sort of Gen X ethos meant anything, and increasingly I'm convinced it didn't, she embodies it, as someone who just decided to let her own muse determine the path of her life, for better or for worse. And it doesn't mean that she like turned down. I mean, she was on the show 24. It's not like she's turned down gigs, and, but she's certainly done commercial things in her life. But I feel like she's always sort of let her internal muse dictate how she spent her time. And I admire that. And she's never let sort of getting older curdle her the way I think it has curdled a lot of comedians of her generation. Like curdled emotionally, like made them turn sour and bitter and old and reactionary. And, to be reactionary, to sort of be a force for negativity instead of a force for positivity.
I love what you're saying, and I love your interpretation of it. But you did bring up another question, which is, was the ethos of our generation, and why do you think it increasingly doesn't matter?
Well, I mean, whenever anybody talks about the ethos of a generation, you're really talking about 10 to 15% of the generation. 85% of any generation is the same as any other. Like, do you know what I mean? Like everybody thinks like in the 60s, everybody was wearing like flowers in their hair and giving the peace symbol. Like, no, that was a subset of people. And then the rest of them, they could have lived in 1968 or 1988 or 2008. Like, they're just living their lives. I would consider myself kind of one of those people. I would never consider myself at the cutting edge of anything. But I think that generations tend to be summed up by that 10 to 15% and how they act. And, and obviously in the mid to late 90s, or the early 90s, really late 80s to 2000, there was sort of that ethos of kind of like, we're not going to, like you're talking about, we're not going to sell out, and I'm going to be credible, and we're going to really not going to put on the show. We're not going to perform for you people. I'm going to just work through my demons or whatever, and some of it is
right.
Performative horseshit at the same time. Yeah. I remember my younger brother was, a little kid during that period, and he had started a band with his friends, and none of them played instruments. So it really wasn't a band. It was just 4 kids and a logo that they had come up with. And I found a sheet of his lyrics once. He had written lyrics for the song that didn't exist. And it was in the era when like 9 Inch Nails was huge, and all the lyrics were like, you ripped out my soul, now there's only a hole, now I'm pissing in hell, or just like real kind of angry boy type stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, like, dude, you're like 12. You don't know any of this. You have no relation to any of this. And it's no different than when I was in the 80s, when I was in my dumb metal band, Fallout, played 7 gigs. When I was in my band, all of my lyrics we had originals. We were pretty cool. But all of the lyrics that I wrote were like, gonna go out all night, gonna fuck all day, party till the sun comes up. It's like, I didn't know anything about that either. It was like completely, I was writing about where that culture was at that point. Right. And he was doing the same thing. And so, and neither of them was real. You know what I mean? He knew nothing about you ripped out my soul, now there's only a hole. And I knew nothing about like, fucking skanks in the men's room.
Well, by the way, I mean, your brother's creative writing is just more evidence to illustrate the point I've tried to make for a long time, that it should be a required part of applying for a gun permit. Like, could we just see some of your poetry just before you get this?
Yeah, absolutely.
AR-15.
And if you haven't written any, well, then you definitely don't get a gun, because that's all in you somewhere and it hasn't come out yet.
Or if you haven't written any, here's a pad. Go over to the corner and come back and let us know about your soul.
Yes. Just what are your feelings about your soul on a scale of 1 to 10? Where would you place your soul?
Let's go with a very light subject if you can. How many more minutes do you have left?
I have whatever you've required.
Wasn't sure. I forgot to ask you. But how are you, Christian Finnegan? How are you beating the heat? The real heat wave across the planet right now, most of the country, hundreds of millions of Americans under some kind of real disconcerting. I mean, there's even government, policies, announcements that they make. I forget what it's called, but under some kind of heat warning. How do you deal with it? Are you an AC person? Are you a fan person? Does it affect your life? Do you excuse yourself to do less work during such conditions? Do you try to get out of the city to the cabin?
Well, I actually was at the cabin until I just drove home. That's where I was until this morning. And in a way, it's better because, you can sit outside and all that. But honestly, it's kind of brutal because there is no AC up there. And when it's this hot, I'd honestly rather be in the city with the AC just because it's, it does definitely affect my mood when it's you're just dripping and covered with bug bites.
Have you ever felt that you're lesser than people who have central air? Maybe you do, but I'm just...
Oh, yeah.
Because we have a home, an actual, freestanding raised ranch. I don't want to brag. And it's just got window units. And I feel lesser than those who have central air. And now I've revealed myself to a lot of listeners that I'm not, the celebrity that they think I am. I've got window units.
Units. Ugh. This guy actually has to know what BTUs represent.
This guy has to know his way around at least a hammer and a knife to fit that motherfucker in and have a decent core strength every spring.
Yeah, it's part of it is just like new construction as opposed to old construction.
Yeah.
New York if you live in one of those new buildings with central air, unless you're very wealthy, a lot of those new buildings kind of suck. And, the walls are really thin and the apartments are really small. Like our apartment is pretty large for a 1-bedroom, but as a result, we have to use window units and crap like that.
Trade off.
But, I have a joke on one of my, I think it's on my latest special. It might be on the album before that. I don't know, about how like when I go to visit my dad in the suburbs, I feel like a medieval time traveler visiting the future. It's like, what is this strange cool air flowing from vents in the wall?
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. That's just one of those things. I've lived in New York my entire adult life. And so I think I don't sometimes appreciate what I put up with on a day-to-day basis to live here until I go to visit like a friend of mine who has a real home.
I feel like it must be different for our generation to a certain extent, because extreme weather could always make people miserable, especially, heat. It can kill people. But now I feel like you have a way to assign blame for it in terms of man-made climate change. And I wonder if that changes like the paradigm, the psychology about if we walk around angrier when it's hot and feeling like we've got somebody to blame for it, including our own existence, I suppose.
I guess it focuses it, to me, I think one of the downside of that, I mean, you're maybe talking about the upside of climate change, which is a very bold stance to take. But I think
no, I'm not saying it's an upside. I'm saying no, I'm not. Blaming someone makes it that much worse. Having someone to blame, like if someone dies, something terrible happens, and it's like an accident, there's no one to blame. It feels like less emotional.
Yeah. I do hate that like hot weather, in addition to just being like uncomfortable and all that, it does reinforce kind of those existential anxieties that you have, because your mind immediately goes to, oh, the planet's getting hotter, we're all dying, there's going to be water wars. that I'm sure in the 70s when there's a heat wave, it's like, oh man, what a brutal week. It wasn't immediately like, oh my God, the ice caps have melted.
Right.
So it's I don't like having my heat exhaustion mixed with existential panic. That's not an ideal combo.
Yeah, so be conscious of that, folks. Maybe thank you for helping me be, I think, more conscious of it. All right, we didn't even really talk much about what's going on.
We talked about nothing. There's like so much going on, and we've talked about none of it.
Well, yeah, but I've been talking about a lot of
you talk to real people about this stuff.
I've been talking about a lot on the podcast this week, but I am always happy to talk with you about any current events. I'm just not sure exactly how much you're paying attention to. I mean, the big story last week certainly was, we didn't talk last week, was the rape and subsequent abortion of a 10-year-old and how that played out in media and how media got it wrong. I talked about that a lot last week, continuing to talk about the concern over women's reproductive rights. But then, yesterday, President Biden came down with
Sarah Palin. That's what Sarah Palin said.
Is it really?
I think she called him O'Biden. Yeah, during one of the debates.
So much happening. But anyway, Biden is COVID. You had the Secret Service text message scandal, which I think is a massive and important thing.
And obviously, I'm sure you've heard that it's now a criminal investigation officially.
Yeah. It has to be, I suppose. I mean,
that was new. I mean, and what and I know this literally from listening to the news. Not that there's no perfect insight on my part, but that they have the Inspector General and the Homeland Security have opened up a criminal investigation. That doesn't necessarily mean that they believe criminal activity has occurred, but it's just like, it's one of the phases basically saying, hey, quit doing your internal investigation because we're taking over, because this is now officially moved up a level.
You and I are taping 2 hours before the primetime J6 hearing, so I'm not talking, anything about that with you, but the other one thing that I know I definitely wanted to get to, unless there's some other, thing that you've been paying attention to that you'd love to give us your interpretation.
I hate to say what I've spent all my time obsessed about.
Please do.
No, this will mean nothing to anyone. It's the impending trade of Donovan Mitchell of the Utah Jazz to the New York Knicks, which
NBA.
is in the offing, and a lot of scuttlebutt about it. And so that is that has taken up way too much of my brain space over the last
then
week.
There's two other things. I don't care about that. I don't know who that is.
You shouldn't care about
and I
that.
don't know why you care about a Utah team. And I kind of...
only because he's about to be traded to the Knicks. All indications are that a superstar
you're a Knicks fan
that currently plays for the Utah Jazz is going to be traded to the Knicks. It's just a question of how much the Knicks have to give up to get him. And there's all sorts of, it's a lot of drama. Who has the leverage, blah, 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 but that's been taking up a lot of my brain.
I don't love talking about sports and I can't talk about music, but your newsletter has certainly made things different for me. New music for olds is really great for so many different reasons. And in the paid newsletter, you have this one part of it about 90s no-hit wonders on each side of the streaming cutoff. And I thought that might be one of the fun things to explain and to let people know that they get. You're also talking...
The people who have
I mean, I'm not just saying it to get people to subscribe. I read every one now, and I feel like you write it in a way that I feel like you're talking to me, and I feel like you see me, and I laugh, and I just love the way that you lay it out. It really is easy and fun and an escape that I feel informed and educated by, and more importantly, I'm learning to listen to new music, which has always been a problem for me. You did it.
Well, thank you. That's
it.
very kind. I really appreciate that. I love doing it. It's something I love doing and something I'm going to keep doing. I hope that it grows to the extent that it doesn't feel like that. It feels like a viable way to spend as much time as I'm spending on it. Right now it's borderline, but, it's something I'm definitely enjoying doing. But yeah, in the weekly, the bi-weekly free one is slightly different than the paid newsletter, which comes on the off weeks. And I just a song came up on shuffle that was like a no-hit wonder from the 90s that I hadn't heard in a long time. And the only reason it came up on shuffle is because I had physically burned it from, I transferred it.
No-hit wonder?
Just a band that that were kind of that had a lot of bands in the 90s, especially if you were like a grunge adjacent type band. There were a lot of record deals are being handed out to a lot of bands that probably maybe wouldn't have received them. And a lot of them I quite enjoyed. I'd go to the Tower Records listening station every week and I'd buy stuff. And so I have all these albums that sound great and, are major label releases that still like made no impact on the culture whatsoever. Like nobody really bought them. But anyway, I went to try to find this band on Spotify or whatever, and I discovered that they don't exist on any of the streaming platforms. That the music that I had physically burned from the CDs that I had transferred to my computer, otherwise I wouldn't have any of their music. Now, some of the songs have been uploaded onto YouTube. Like YouTube seems to be like the last refuge for a lot of these bands. Otherwise, they would just sort of not exist anymore. And so I kind of just, as a game for myself, because I'm looking for ways to waste time, I went through my entire library and I picked out like 15 bands that I thought were like, I could see this going either way. Like I could see them not having graduated to streaming. And then I kind of just saw which ones had and which ones hadn't. And then I made a playlist of the ones that had, and then the few that had been purged from the music streaming sites, I just, showed a few of their videos and talked about them.
I love it. And you write, pour out a Zima for the three bands that failed to make the jump. They're all adorably time specific and enjoyable in their own way. I love your writing style. Never really maybe appreciated it as much. I've always known you're a good writer and, through your stand-up, but I just like reading it in this way.
Thank
also,
you, man.
You've encouraged me. I can't even believe I'm saying this, but like I'm making a playlist for me.
God forbid.
I know it's
great. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like,
I won't really share it with anybody because the embarrassment would be too much for me to deal with because of my image.
I would try, and I think we all have those feelings of embarrassment or whatever. I have them. I'm not saying that if you were to play it for me, I wouldn't wince, or you might wince at mine or whatever.
Wince.
But what I'm trying to, if I have any goal for this at all, is just to remind people of how great it feels to have a new song that you love.
Yes.
Yes. And it's something that when you're in your 20s just happens whether you want it to or not, because this sort of, pop culture wave motion gun is aimed at your face. and everything is sort of geared towards you. And so you absorb new stuff, whether you want to or not, but you get to a certain age and it's just not part of your day anymore to try to find that stuff. And there's so many things that suck about the way the music industry is organized now. The one good thing is that you can just basically, like the guy on the beach with the metal detector, like you can just find stuff. Just if you're bored, just click around. And, I guarantee you, I like sort of sharing songs that I love, but it's not super important to me that anybody else likes them. But if it makes you look for stuff that you like, then that's cool.
Well, that's exactly what it's doing. And the other, what you said as well. I mean, I find new stuff and I'm incentivized to go look on my own. You really, it's been quite an intervention in my life. It really, I think about you a lot more than I even did. And I was already thinking about you most of the day.
Excellent. Please. Once it passes the 12-hour a day mark, please let me know. That's my goal.
I write. It got so bad I started like having a draft folder for texts I couldn't send.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ever since you tweeted,
I have a notebook and I've been writing Mr. Christian Dominic on the front of my notebook.
Ever since you tweeted something about people need to know the difference between the appropriateness of what's a text and what's a phone call, I have felt nothing but insecurity about reaching out to you.
Dude, you know what's so fun? I know we're closing up, but I had this literal experience yesterday. We're all going through it in various ways. And one of the things that I've been trying to be better about is I sometimes don't know how to be friends with people. I find it awkward. I find that I either am standoffish or it gets weird and I'm always worried about things getting weird. And there's a guy I know, and I wouldn't even call him a friend of mine. He's just somebody I know. And I know he was going through some health stuff, and another friend of mine is going through some serious health stuff, which reminded me of him. And I just thought, you know what? I'm going to drop that dude a text and just see how he's doing. But we're not really on those terms. Do you know what I mean? That it's like, we're not quite close enough that we would text each other without a reason. But I did. And I was just like, hey man, how you feeling? Like, my friend is going through some health stuff and it made me think of you. And he was like, it's a problem with his gut, his stomach. And he's like, is it the same problem that I have? Like, why are you, basically he didn't understand why I was texting him. And then all of a sudden it made it weird. And then it goes this long conversation. And now I'm trying to end it. I'm the one who started it. And I'm like, all right, well, gotta go. And so it started with me trying to reach out and be a good friend or just be a good, acquaintance to someone. And then ended with me being like, all right, see you later, loser. Bye. And I didn't mean it to go that way, but that's sort of the story of my personal interactions.
Oh, I bet you so many people can relate. It's very interesting, and I appreciate you sharing that. I did want to ask you one more thing, which is because I just saw this. I watched Dave Chappelle's new special, quote special, on Netflix, where it's basically him talking to his alma mater high school, which is an arts school, Duke Ellington School, outside DC or in DC, and it's kind of a speech, but it's kind of got some jokes in it too, and somehow he put it out on Netflix as a special, so it's somewhat confusing. I'll play this clip after I let you go and include it because I saw it on your timeline. You already heard it. It's 2 minutes and 20 seconds, but you know what I'm talking about. In the new special, Chappelle basically talks about some of the controversy that he's been the center of, the firestorm around his feelings on trans people and so on. And he basically defends free speech. We're allowed to have artistic freedom. And he goes on to basically say, I'm the best that ever lived at comedy. And if you think I'm wrong, then prove it with your own jokes, prove it with your own ideas. And this video, I think it matters that he's a black guy. I think he's a comedian. He must be.
He is, yeah.
Basically explains so well about why comedy, the words matter and who you are matters and why that's kind of a dumb argument. And I'll play it after, but I wanted you to just give your thoughts on what this guy is saying and a little color around this situation and why Chappelle is doing.
Well, it's been a week or so I don't remember it perfectly, but I mean, I remember why it resonated with me because, he's basically saying it's like, not everyone can just drop a Netflix special and have a legion of people defend whatever they say, you know. So the idea of like that this is some sort of meritocracy and that you've that the only way to critique you is to be more successful than you, and if I'm not more successful than you, then I should just shut up and never have any negative words to say about you.
Right.
It's just it's so lame, and it's such a cowardly sort of front runner attitude, you know. And again, I feel like I come back to these topics a lot, and, you know, luckily I don't really have any bridges left to burn, but, you know, if I owe, and I'm sure I've said this on this podcast before, if I owe whatever you want to call my career, if I owe it to anybody, I owe it to Dave Chappelle. I mean, that's, you know, I will always be the white guy from Chappelle Show. I mean, that'll be on my fucking tombstone, and I'd be lucky if that was the case. And he is in the top 3 funniest people ever, in my opinion, in, you know, at least in a specific window of time.
Sure.
But times change. And this is, you know, when I was talking about people curdling, I mean, he's kind of the perfect example. You know, they become reactionary, and they become, instead of being the agent of change, they become the person trying to stop the change, you know, and making fun of it and complaining about it. And they think that human progress ends the minute it starts inconveniencing them personally. You know what I mean? And ever since he has sort of gotten to that stuff, ever since he kind of came back, he spends more time talking about his greatness than he spends writing material or actually being great. And that's just so the opposite of comedy to me. And I understand that, you know, and this is maybe dicey, you know, because that's sort of a hip hop trope, is to sort of the braggadocio of, you know, I'm the best. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's part of that culture, and I get it, especially when you're talking about a culture of people who are starting at the bottom. Now we're here, you know, like that's the idea of that, you know, I fought my way up to the top with nothing but my sheer determination. I think that attitude works much better with music than it does with comedy. That attitude of like, I'm the best, it's the opposite of comedy to me personally, unless it's ironic and silly. Like, comedy is not about blowing up the balloon. Comedy is about popping the balloon, you know, to me. And so I remember a friend of mine saying that, like, you knew a black comic had lost the plot when they did a special wearing an all leather outfit, and that you knew a white comic had lost the plot when they came out to like guitar soloing in like flames in the background. Like that's the equivalent. Those are the equivalent sort of signs of hubris, and the sign that you have forgotten what being a comedian is, and now you're just sort of trying to leverage being awesome.
Oh, so well said. Did you hear that they theater canceled the Chappelle Show after an outcry from their staff in
yeah, I did.
Minneapolis?
And, you know, and yeah, I don't, part of me is like, I don't know that I have an articulate thought about that, because I don't think that, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's like, oh, well, this is just fuel for the fire for all these people saying that he's been canceled, you know, and so part of me rolls my eyes slightly at that. But, you know, he's a venue owner, and my wife's a venue owner, and there's certain people she wouldn't book. And as long as you're consistent, book whoever you want to book, but then expect the blowback, or don't book anybody. You know, I mean, it's hard when you know, especially post COVID, when every venue is struggling to stay open. Like, oh, you're telling me that like one of the biggest stars in the world is going to come and pack out our place and we'll make thousands upon thousands of dollars in profit that night. I can see that being a difficult thing to turn down.
Yeah.
Honestly, the way it went down, from what I can tell, is kind of the worst of both worlds. You know, to me, the time to make that decision was before you release a press release booking the person. You know what I mean? That it's like, come on, you didn't see this coming. Like there weren't internal discussions. Like, you didn't think. To me, if you're gonna book him, then let the show go on. And if you want to have principles, then don't book him. And I'm not saying that if you book them, you don't have principles. I'm saying, but if that's the line you're drawing, that, you know, we're not going to book people who do transphobic material, then that's something you knew before you made the offer.
Right.
That was you shouldn't have needed a public outcry to have seen that coming down the pike. Not in 2022.
Well, you threaded that needle perfectly. That you gave
I have a habit of coming up with answers that please no one.
No, it's a hard issue. It's not supposed to please us. I know,
but I'm, you know, in which of course is very swimming against the cultural tide, because everybody wants you to either be all one thing or all the other thing.
Yeah, the cultural tide here at Stand Up is the cultural tide here with the stand up community is a complex, nuanced one.
Right. No, I just mean though, in terms of, you know, social media and whatnot, that it's like you get no traction for being nuanced about anything. And that's, you know, in my own way, that is my way of being Janine Garofalo, like in Christ-like, is so well, accepting that my opinion will not garner me retweets. Yes, it may not garner your retweets, but I just love the way that you explain things and look at life. That's why it's like it never gets old talking to you, and I'm sure people that listen to our talks feel the same way because they tell me to my face. Well, that's very nice. I genuinely appreciate it, and if I don't always express that properly, it's just because I get weird about stuff like that.
I love you, man. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, dude.
All right, there he goes. Another wonderful, thoughtful, nuanced conversation with my friend, your friend, comedian Christian Finnegan. Again, I can't recommend it highly enough for people of a certain age, especially. And if you're like me and you don't know a lot about music, you're intimidated by it and talking about it, and you want to find new music because it does make a difference in your life, go subscribe to newmusicforolds.substack.com and let Christian know you appreciated him, please. It'll mean a lot to him. And now, by the way, here is the audio that I was talking about, the riff. It's 2 minutes or so, a little more than 2 minutes. And this guy's name is Yadoye Travis. He's an LA comic. He is a black guy. I don't know anything else really about him. But if you saw that new stand-up special that Chappelle did, and Eric Siegel mentioned it this week on the show, he said he really liked it. I watched it today. I always loved Chappelle, but it wasn't a lot of jokes, really. It was just kind of a talk. And, well, here is the reaction from one other, relatively unknown black male stand-up comedian.
Okay, I don't know if there's really a lesson I can articulate for Chappelle specifically, because he's proved he's not going to learn shit. But my problem with him and people like him is that they pretend that comedy exists outside of the realm of reality. And it's sort of there's a dual feature to it where they trade in this idea of like, I'm just telling a joke. It doesn't mean anything. But also, if you want to criticize me, it better be funny or else there's no value to it. And comics want stand up to be hip hop so bad that they want to add this competitive element to it when we're all going out and individually making people laugh and all this shit. Like this whole notion of like, go out and make a funnier special than me if you want to criticize me, when we all know that it's only a select handful of comics that get to make hour-long specials in the first place. Like, it's not the same dynamic. We can't just hop up on a track and put out an hour like it's a diss track. It doesn't work that way. It's like if Kendrick put out the Control verse and every other rapper was like, all right, nigga, we don't have the means to record shit. In the special I'm referring to, he specifically says, I challenge my peers to make an equal to my last special, The Closer. And the notion that any of us are even his peers in the traditional sense is insane. Because first of all, 99% of us don't have the ability to just bump people off shows and do 4 hours of comedy, whether it's good or not, to an unsuspecting audience. This whole idea of freedom of expression, I think, is a reflection of just the American value system in general, where we defend rights for the sake of those rights, whether or not there's any substance to why we want those rights in the first place. Think about freedom of speech. There's this trend of like, I will defend his right to say whatever the fuck he wants, whether I agree with it or not. with no consideration to the value of what he's saying, or this right to bear arms without any consideration to whether you have anything to defend in the first place.
Well, there you go. I thought that was a really interesting perspective that I wanted to try to share. Thanks for Christian for letting me know about that guy, Idoye Travis. Maybe I'll reach out to him and get him on. But yeah, Chappelle would come by and still does. I mean, does this all the time, comedy clubs, and then bump all the other comedians that plan to be there that night, then just go on for hours. I mean, all kinds of famous comedians come in and they bump you, but they're respectful that there are other comedians that had a plan and worked hard on their set that night. So, you know, anywhere from Louis C.K. to Robin Williams used to do it, Chris Rock does it, Jerry Seinfeld does it. They show up unannounced, they go on stage, but they usually only do like 10 or 15 minutes working out their material, and that's great for everybody. So, yeah, even John Mayer, the musician, used to do it. And I remember I got in an argument about that with Louis C.K. We were at the Comedy Cellar, and I was like, well, you know, I don't go up on his shows and bring a guitar. Why does he come and start doing comedy? He's not even a comedian. And Louis made the argument that he's a big name. He's bringing people into a club on a Tuesday night, and otherwise we wouldn't even have an audience. So, you know, I don't know. There you go. All right. Well, that's the show today. I hope you appreciate it. Thank you so much to Christian Finnegan and, of course, Marisa Renee Lee, who was just so great. I enjoyed so much. Thank you to all of you who joined me last night, as well as those of you that are paid subscribers. Welcome. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will talk to you Monday right here on Stand Up. John Carroll taking us out one final time this week. Love you guys. Be the change you want to see in the world.
Red and brown, she's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in. With other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, to make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? Cost of freedom never go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand